Welcome back for day 6 of the Blender Basics Bootcamp. Today we're going to cover the basics of materials in Blender and we'll make some shiny metal materials for our trophy. So let's get blingin'. I immediately regret saying that. My name is Chris Folia. I'm your stream scholar. Welcome to Stream School. So if you're coming back later from the previous tutorial and you're just now reopening your Blender file, you might notice that the upper left-hand panel is no longer in rendered preview mode. Don't panic, that is totally normal. Whenever you reopen a Blender file, it automatically defaults rendered preview mode back to regular shaded mode, I'm assuming to save on performance and prevent any issues that it could cause. You know how to fix that, you know how to get back, just hold Z and go to rendered mode. And now we're ready to make some material magic. So I'm gonna go down to the node editor, zoom out, and center this. Then I'm gonna switch from world to object. And you're gonna notice that we have a completely blank canvas here. We don't have any nodes, no materials to work on, nothing. And that's partially because we have a lamp selected and also partially because we haven't made any materials yet and none of our objects have any materials assigned. So I'm gonna go ahead and select my trophy. And since we have this box unchecked, you won't be able to see the outline around it in this window. So you might have to look over here to make sure it's selected. Then I'm gonna go all the way down to the right and click on the little checkered or tiled sphere, which is our material properties. And you're gonna notice there's not a whole lot here to do other than click the new button. And that'll give us a brand new material with all of these shiny, beautiful properties. And I want you to get in the habit of not really looking over here, but spending most of your material time in the node editor, because that is where all the magic really happens. And it's honestly, in the long run, once we have more complicated materials, it's gonna be easier to navigate the materials in the node editor. So by default, Blender gives you a principled BSDF. The principled shader uses a physically based rendering, or PBR, workflow. No, it doesn't stand for Pabst Blue Ribbon. Anyway, the PBR workflow basically says that any object in the world can be defined or described with just a few different properties. 1, what color is it? 2, is it metallic or made of metal? 3, how rough is it? And 4, bump, or you can use image textures to add bumpiness to your surface that you don't really feel like modeling. Then there are also some other parameters here, like anisotropic and sheen and subsurface scattering, which allows you to have light literally scatter under the surface to create like a wax or a skin kind of material. But we're not going to focus on those today. We're going to keep it simple and we're going to make some really cool base materials for our trophy objects. So with the trophy selected, I'm happy with the color currently, but all you have to do is click the box next to base color and this color wheel comes up and you can change the trophy color to anything you want. But right now it looks kind of like a boring plastic. So I want to make this into a silver metal trophy. So to do that, all I have to do is go down to the metallic property, which we just went over. So for that, I just have to click the metallic and slide my mouse all the way to the right. Now this trophy is entirely metal. It looks like a really matte metal. It doesn't have a whole lot of reflectivity to it, but we can fix that with the third property, which not third property on the list, but third property we discussed, which is roughness. So if we change the roughness down, we can get an entirely shiny metal trophy. But having something that completely reflective isn't the most realistic, so I'm gonna make it a little bit rough. Maybe like 0.125 will look pretty good. So now as we zoom out, it's a little bit blurred, but not by a whole lot. So we still get that really cool reflection detail from our HDRI. So now we want to take this trophy material and apply this to the handles as well. So if I select my bigger handle object, the interior one here, again, you can see it selected over here, go to the materials panel, I can click the materials dropdown, and here we have our material. So if I click on that, I'm probably going to rename this by clicking on it and calling it base metal. But you'll notice that now our handle is metallic as well. And this handle is using the exact same material as the trophy cup. It's linked. So for instance, if I change the roughness here, it's going to change it on the trophy cup as well, because they're both using the exact same material. And you can tell that next to the material name. So for instance, base metal, then 2 says, hey, there are 2 objects using this material, which is beneficial to us because if we want to make changes later, we don't want to make changes on each individual object. That would just be really tedious. Let's say we want to add another metal material to our outside handle. Well, we could create an entirely new material, but I like how shiny this is, and I don't want to redo that work. So I'm going to select the outside material, go to the materials panel, click the drop down, click the base metal, and right here where it says 3, I'm just going to click that, and that's going to create an entirely new material using the exact same settings. So here I'm going to call this secondary metal. And I might make this one a different color. I think I'm gonna make this one a nice purple to represent Stream Scholar channel. I was gonna say Stream School, but then I caught myself because I renamed that YouTube channel, you know? So anyway, something like that looks pretty cool. And I want you all to experiment with this. This doesn't even have to be metallic. You could make like a nice rough rubber for your second material. You can do whatever you want. Get creative and make something that you think looks cool. Anyway, I'm gonna set this back to 0.125 and I'm gonna make this metallic again. But now we want to apply this second material to the cup. And just our luck, any object in Blender can have as many materials as you want to give it. So if I go back over to the materials panel and I click the drop down and choose secondary metal, now the entire cup is that material, which is not what we want. So if I put this back to base metal, how we can add a second material is going up to this little plus icon right here, clicking it, and now we have a blank slate for a new material. So I'm just gonna click the material drop down, select secondary metal, and you're gonna notice nothing happens. That's because we need to apply this material to whatever faces we want to have it in edit mode. So if I scroll around 3D view here, go to solid shaded mode, and then hit tab to go into edit mode, 3 to go into face select if you have forgotten since the modeling tutorials so long ago. Anyway, we can hold Alt and Shift to select all of these loops in the band. Not like a rock band or anything. Oh shoot, I also have some stuff selected down here previously. Okay, I'm just gonna hit Alt-A to deselect everything, and I'm gonna reselect this band. There are other tricks to do it, but I don't wanna get into that right now. So anyway, with this band selected, and the secondary metal selected, all I have to do is click assign, and that will assign it to the selected faces. And you can assign this to any face you want. If I just want like some random squares of purple down here, I can select secondary metal and apply it. But that looks pretty ugly, and we're gonna add our logo to the front of this later. But also notice if you select any objects while in edit mode, it will automatically select whatever material is assigned to that object. Now, I don't like the base metal and the secondary metal being the exact same color in the viewport, so Blender has a really cool property for that at the bottom of the material in the materials panel called the viewport display. So you can change what it looks like in the viewport when it's not being rendered. So if I click viewport display, go down here, I can just change this color to a nice purple so it matches. So now, even when we're not rendering, we can tell what materials are assigned to what part of the object. Now I'm gonna go down to this little ring down here, do the exact same thing. Just select all the loops that I want here, like so, and I'm going to apply the secondary metal. So if I zoom out, now we have that down there. And finally, in our reference, we also had a different material around the base here, but I wanna do some additional modeling to make it look like it's constructed. So I'm gonna go ahead and add an additional edge loop, add an additional edge loop, add an additional edge loop, just all of the edge loops. Add an additional edge loop. I promise I'm stopping now. Then I'm gonna select the center edge loop. I'm just gonna scale that down just a little bit. And something we didn't talk about in the modeling videos was adding creases. So if I wanna make this completely sharp on the inside without adding additional edge loops in addition to our additional edge loops, I can hit Shift E and move my mouse to the right, and that will crease that edge and make it perfectly sharp. So now I'm just gonna hit 3 for face select in edit mode. I'm gonna select the loops that I want. I might have to go to front view, set it to wireframe, and click and drag to select the bottom faces while holding Shift, by the way. Dumb mistake. go back to solid mode, and here I'm just gonna hit assign, and now the entire base here is purple as well, which is exactly what we want. So our trophy is looking pretty dope, sick, nasty, ill, bruh, if I do say so myself, but I'm ready to work on the base here. So this is gonna be easy. I'm gonna hit tab to go back out of edit mode. I'm gonna select my text now, and I'm just gonna give that the base metal. Although it's a little bit dark based on what it's reflecting right now. So I might make this a little bit rougher to make it pick up more of the light. So I'm going to hit the little 3. I'm going to call this text metal. And here I'm just going to mess with the roughness, and that will brighten it up a little bit based on our reflective circumstances. Then I'm going to select the nameplate, and I'm going to give that the secondary metal, which already looks pretty cool. Yeah, I think that's passable. I'll allow it. Looking pretty good. So now we have our trophy, we have our nameplate, we have our text. Let's do one final material here on our trophy for the base object. I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna make an entirely new material. Y'all already know how to do this. It should be second nature by now. And for this one, I'm just gonna change the base color down to black. So it's like gonna be a black rubber. And here we can make this a little bit rougher. But you're noticing this entire surface has the exact same roughness over it. And that's because we're using one number for the roughness. But you can also use textures for roughness. So you can have different roughnesses at different points of the surface. And Blender has something here called procedural textures, which are also 3D textures, which means we don't have to do any sort of complicated UV mapping like we're going to cover in the next video. So for this, all we have to do is hit Shift A, go to texture, and we're going to use a noise texture node. Notice again, it's attached to my mouse until I click it down. If I take the factor and plug that into roughness, you're going to notice we get some pretty drastic results, because this texture, if we look at it on the base color, is going from black to white. So it's going to give us some pretty drastic roughness results. So instead of using this noise texture as our actual roughness values, we can use it as a mix, as a mask or a mixer for different roughness values that we actually want. But before we do that, let's make it look not squished, because the generated texture coordinates on it are not super great. Now, you're already familiar with the texture coordinate node. So if I hit Shift A, input, texture coordinate, it's the exact same node we used on the world in the last video. So if I click that down, instead of using generated coordinates, I want to use the object coordinates. And these are based on the scale of the object in the edit mode relative to its actual object container. So for instance, if I go to edit mode and I move this object around, you'll notice that that texture is 3D, and where the faces of the object are, they collide with the texture to generate the texture on the surface of it. That probably sounded really complicated. Just know that object coordinates are dope. So anyway, we don't need the vector mapping node for this to scale it, because the noise texture has a whole bunch of parameters built in. So I can make this a little bit smaller. And then we can also make this more of like a swirly, smudgy pattern just by messing with the distortion. So if I click and drag on the distortion, you'll notice it makes kind of a swirly, smudgy pattern. Then I might scale it up. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive. The higher you scale it, the smaller it gets. The lower you scale it, the bigger it gets. So I don't want this to be too big. I'm just going to drag this down while holding Shift, maybe somewhere around there, just to add some extra detail to our object. And the distortion might honestly be a little bit too much, but y'all can play around with whatever values. Oh, wow. I'm not hitting period. Y'all can play around with whatever values you want, and I'm also going to up the detail on this, just to give the clouds a little bit more detail, although it does increase render time. So now we have this, but let's make this mix two roughness values that we actually want. So if I do Shift A, input value, sorry, I got lost there I had a brain fart for a second. Anyway, then Shift D to duplicate that value. Then I can do Shift A to do color mix RGB. Now, by default, I could just slide this back and forth, But the problem is this is an RGB output going into a black and white input. So 0.6 value on a color is not the same as a 0.6 roughness value. So to get the exact roughness values you want, I found that plugging the number values into the mix RGB node will give you the exact roughness values you type in. So I'm going to put this into color 1, this into color 2, plug the color into roughness, and now our roughness is exactly the same because both of our values are the same. And also we don't have a factor. So how this mix node works, sorry for not explaining it yet, is it takes color 1 and it mixes it with color 2 based on the factor. And if you plug a texture into the factor, like say our noise texture, then anything that is white in the image will be color 2 for our roughness. Anything that is black in the texture will be color 1 for our roughness. And anything that's in between will be in between. How cool is that? So for instance, if I set value 1 to 0.35, now you'll notice we get some really subtle variance in our roughness texture on this object, which is really cool. And we're keeping it super subtle. I might up this to 0.55, but we don't want to go too much on it. We just want it to be a really subtle additional like smudginess on our base here, so it doesn't look absolutely perfectly pristine, because nothing in real life is absolutely perfectly pristine. And at this point, I want to do one more thing in this scene, and that is add some glass to our trophy case, which I've been avoiding up until now because we haven't been working in the rendered preview mode. But I think in our introduction to shaders would be a really good time to create a nice glass material. So for that, I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh plane. I'm going to hit 3 to go to orthographic left, hold Z to go to wireframe. Here, I'm going to hit R, minus 90 to rotate it negative 90 degrees on the right orthographic view. And here, I'm just going to try to line this up with the edge of our trophy case, like so, with the edge of our shelf and the back of our molding. So here, doesn't have to be perfect. Now I'm just going to scale this on up. Y'all already know how to do this, I hope. And now you can see we have our glass, we have the molding on the outside and everything else on the inside. So now let's create a nice glass material for this. So I'm gonna go to the materials panel, I'm gonna hit new, and here we have a principled shader. And for a really simple, again, I want to stress extremely simple glass shader, we just want some really simple reflections from our background in the glass. We don't want to use all of these really complicated processor-intensive principled BSDF shader node properties. We can really break this down and make this a whole lot simpler. So I'm going to select the principled BSDF. I'm going to hit delete to delete that node. Now our glass is completely solid black. So now I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to shader and I'm going to select a transparent BSDF. Make sure you choose transparent and not translucent. So if I select transparent BSDF, snap it down into the view, and I attach the green dot to the first green dot of our material output, you'll notice that this is still completely black. That's because in the Eevee rendering engine, you have to define transparency for objects or for materials. So if I go over here to the materials panel, down here under settings where it says blend mode, we want to change that from opaque to alpha blend, and now it's correct. You'll also notice it's casting a complete shadow and completely obstructing any of our other shadows. So for this super duper simple glass material, we're just gonna turn shadows off altogether. So I'm gonna go back under the settings here, and where it says shadow mode opaque, I'm gonna select that drop down and change that to none. So now our glass is not casting any shadows, and I know that glass actually casts shadows in real life, but for the sake of this scene looking good, it needs to not cast shadows, okay? So anyway, I'm gonna take our transparent BSDF, and we wanna give this some reflections. So to do that, I'm gonna hit Shift A, go to shader, and we're gonna add a nice glossy shader. This is, if we plug it in, a completely reflective shader with a roughness of 0.5 right now. So I'm going to turn that down to 0.005. And now we get a perfectly reflective plane. Now, the glossy shader is what you used to use to make metallic objects before Principled BSDF existed. But if we mix this with the transparent, so I hit Shift A, go to shader, and we drop down a mix shader. How intuitive is that to mix two things together? Now I can plug the glossy on the bottom, the transparent on the top, and then I can plug the mix shader into the surface. Now, we don't want to use a texture for this. Right now, it's being blended by a factor of 0.5. If I slide all the way to the left, it's going to be completely transparent. If I slide all the way to the right, it's going to be completely glossy. So the really cool thing about HDRIs, or high dynamic range images, is that the super bright windows are going to stay around in the reflections longer than the stuff that doesn't have a value brighter than white, just like in real life. So if I slide this down to like 0.015, yeah, maybe like 0.025, you can see the reflections, but we can't really see much about anything else, which is exactly what we want. That behaves more like real glass. So to adjust the reflections, all we have to do is click the drop down for object, go to world, which we've already done before, and we can just mess with the rotation, and that'll put the reflections where we actually want them. So I'm gonna rotate this a little bit, just like that. And you'll also notice that this is affecting the reflections on the cup as well. Anyway, at this point, I'm pretty happy with the progress we've made on materials for today. In the next part, we're going to UV unwrap, which I know that sounds like a weird sunlight thing, but we're gonna UV unwrap this trophy, and we're gonna add some image textures to it to add a few little imperfections and such. But until then, I'll see you in the next video. At this point, you should have some basic materials in place for your trophy. And as always, Broken Record Chris here to remind you to have fun, play around with it, and come up with something that really suits you. If you found this video useful and want to stay tuned for day 7, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell. I'll be releasing these basics videos on a daily basis for the duration of the course. And if you want to come hang out with me live, I'm live at least every Friday over at youtube.com/oraclefish. Also, if you want to download my example files or just support what I do here on the channel, make sure you check out my brand new Patreon, link in the description. Until next time, my name is Chris Folia, I'm your stream scholar, and class is out.